Hello, I'm the Dungeon Doctor. Welcome to the latest part of my Monk Masterclass series. This week, by popular demand, I'm going to review The Way of the Ascendant Dragon. It's a pretty timely video to make, as just recently the Dragonlance books have just released, and for players looking to build a dragon-themed monk, this, on the face of it, is a great subclass to use. So, if you're looking for a great dragon-themed character for an upcoming Dragonlance campaign, stick around to hear my thoughts on the subclass, and in the follow-up video to this one, I'll be presenting how I would optimize this subclass. Released in Fizban's Treasury of Dragons, this is actually the youngest monk subclass released for 5th edition at the time of this recording. I well remember the disappointment the D&D community had when the final version of this class was released. There were significant nerfs made between this version and the one we saw in the Unearthed Arcana. So let's see if the subclass actually lives up to that infamy, or if the rules designers of Wizards of the Coast have actually learned a thing or two about how to make a good monk subclass. With every subclass, we get a bit of descriptive text, which gives a sense of the fantasy that this subclass is trying to portray. Here's what we hear about the subclass in Fizban's Treasury of Dragons. The fundamental teaching of this tradition holds that by emulating dragons, a monk becomes a more integrated part of the world and its magic. By altering their spirit to resonate with draconic might, monks who follow this tradition augment their prowess in battle, bolster their allies, and can even soar through the air on draconic wings. But all this power is in service of a greater goal, achieving a spiritual unity with the essence of the material plane. What this seems to suggest is that all the tropes that we expect of a dragon-inspired monk should be in this subclass. What this reminds me of in popular media is a beautiful moment in Avatar the Last Airbender where Aang and Zuko are learning the secrets of firebending directly from two dragons. And when we get down to the features of this subclass, we find that they actually are really strongly inspired by different elements, albeit how they're interpreted through their connection to different coloured dragons in the D&D universe. In a way, this subclass is like a do-over of the Four Elements monk, which, given that is often described as the worst monk subclass, it kind of makes sense that Wizards of the Coast would want another stab at it. I personally have some affection for the Four Elements monk, so it'll be interesting to see how this subclass compares with that one. At 3rd level we gain 2 subclass features, although the first of these, Draconic Disciple, is effectively 3 features. With Draconic Presence, we can reroll a Charisma, Intimidation, or Persuasion check when we fail it, and our once per day usage of this feature gets used only when we are actually successful in turning a failure into a success. As I've said in previous videos, the monk class has very little to make them great in social situations, so I think this is a useful ability for making our active social skills better. It does raise the question of whether these social checks should be a binary save or fail in the first place though, as I kinda like degrees of success and failure in these kinds of checks myself. For example, if the DC on a check is a 15 and the player gets a 20, I'd probably give them an additional benefit for passing that well. The next feature we gain is Draconic Strikes. With this, whenever we make an unarmed strike, we can replace the bludgeoning damage we would normally deal with either acid, cold, fire, lightning, or poison damage. This is great as it lets us get around damage immunity to our unarmed strikes from a very low level. Arguably though, the feature is a little redundant after level 6 when our unarmed strikes become magical, which is a really reliable form of damage. That being said, I do like how this feature could allow us to take advantage of damage vulnerabilities where they do come up in play. And unlike similar features like Fangs of the Fire Snake from 4 Elements Monk or the Arms of the Astral Self from the Astral Self Monk, we don't need to spend ki to use this feature, so it's always available to us. Next we get Tongue of Dragons. This gives us the ability to speak, read or write Draconic or one other language of our choice. This is good flavour for the subclass. I really like that it gives the player the flexibility to choose a different language in case they already speak Draconic, or perhaps they'd want to pick a different language which fits their theme better. I could see players picking Primordial instead, which from my experiences I found a lot of elemental monsters are able to understand, so it's worth considering picking that instead. The last feature we gain is Breath of the Dragon. Proficiency bonus times per day, we can replace one of the attacks we make using the attack action with a breath weapon attack. When we've used up all these uses, we can still use the feature, but it will then cost us 2 key points each time. We get to choose the area of the effect, either a 30 foot by 5 foot wide line emanating from us, or a 20 foot cone. And we can choose the damage type between acid, cold, fire, lightning or poison. Finally, the damage we deal is equal to 2 rolls of our martial arts die, or half of this if the creature makes a successful dexterity saving throw. Mechanically, there's a lot I like about this feature. Firstly, we have some free uses of the feature each day, and we can still use the feature after that by spending key points. I also like that they've built this in a way that this works with the extra attack feature, as instead of making this cost an action and making us choose between 2 attacks or this feature, we can do both simultaneously. I really like it when the game's rules lets us do this, because the issue for martial classes having to use their action for a feature is that before level 5 the feature might be really strong, but then after that point it kind of competes with our extra attack feature. Unless a feature that costs an action scales really well, then it's always going to be hard to justify using it after level 5. The rules designers who contributed to Fizban's Treasury of Dragons used this idea with the new Dragonborn race that featured in that book too, and it was really popular as it let those Dragonborn races use their breath weapon attack by replacing one of their attacks with it. And then WotC decided to remove it from Dragonborn in the 1D&D playtest material, a move which both baffled and angered the D&D community. While we're on the subject, my own personal homebrew rule for Dragon Breath's breath weapon is that it takes a bonus action to use, and this works really well because I find our martial characters, they'll often have a fun combo where they deliver a couple of attacks and then finish off the round with a breath weapon, and it always has this really cinematic feel to it, even if the breath weapon attack isn't actually doing that much damage. But back to the official rules. The ability to adjust the shape of our breath weapon is really cool and useful. It adds a great bit of tactical play to a martial class which usually isn't there, making us think about our positioning and the positioning of enemies and allies on the field. The one downside to this feature though is it's pretty weak. It starts off as 2d4 damage and it scales to 2d6 at level 5. However, when we get to level 11, it makes a bit of a big jump, scaling to 3d8 damage. I wish the breath weapon attack could have started out a bit more powerful, maybe adding a wisdom or proficiency bonus to the damage dealt, but overall I'm pretty happy with the abilities we've gained at level 3. For our 6th level feature, we gain Wings Unfurled. Proficiency bonus times per day, which is 3 when we gain it. We gain a fly speed equal to our walking speed when we use Step of the Wind, but the wings disappear at the end of our turn. This is unique among Monk subclass features in that it's a feature that triggers when we use Step of the Wind. I wish more subclass features did this for Monk, like maybe giving us an additional benefit when we used Patient Defense. Let's start with the positives for this feature. This can have some great out of combat uses for exploration and infiltration. And in combat, it's a useful mobility boost that can let us reach areas we might not be able to otherwise. This could potentially put us somewhere unreachable for our enemies, allowing us to really exploit ranged combat. It can also make our Draconic Breath more effective, as when we're flying and we direct a 20-foot cone downwards, it will actually cover a 20 by 20 foot area, which is bigger than it would do if we were just on the ground. I also see a potential exploit where we could perhaps grapple creatures with our attack action and then using our bonus action fly them somewhere. This could be good for exploiting area of effect spells, environmental hazards, or even rescuing allies. But now for the problems with the feature. We have limits on how often we can use it, just 3 times when we gain it. Eventually we'll have up to 6 uses a day, but until then it feels really limiting, as once we've used up all of our uses for the day, it's like we don't have a 6th level subclass feature. I feel like it should have at least had the option to spend key to use this feature, and we find that's the case with all the other subclass features that the Ascendant Dragon Monk get, so it feels almost like the rules designers forgot to include that option here. The last issue is that the flight is very limited. I think I understand the logic the game's designers did have in limiting it. Monks are already so fast that giving them long durations of flight might lead to some shenanigans. I think though that there should have been options to allow this monk to stay airborne for longer periods than they are. Maybe have the wings last until the end of your next turn, so that way you could reuse the feature round after round to stay airborne. It would have at least made things more interesting and strategic. At 11th level, our Breath of the Dragon is getting a big boost from 2d6 to 3d8, and we gain the feature Aspect of the Worm. once per long rest, or for the cost of 3 key points after we've used that once per long rest usage, we can, as a bonus action, summon a draconic aura that extends for 10 feet around us and lasts for 1 minute. When we create the aura, and as a bonus action on each turn after this one, we can attempt to cause a creature to become frightened of us if it fails a wisdom saving throw against our key save DC. Creatures can repeat the saving throw at the end of each of their turns. Lastly, we can grant ourselves and any allies within our 10 feet aura resistance to either acid, cold, fire, lightning or poison damage. This is just a fantastic feature in my opinion. Firstly, it just costs a bonus action, which is great for our action economy as it keeps our extra attack feature available, just like we saw with the Breath of the Dragon feature at 3rd level. Next, it effectively lets us use the spell Cause Fear on creatures round after round without concentration. So when we have this feature active, we can continually spread the frighten effect over enemies throughout a combat. It's almost like an improved version of the Hour of Reaping effect from the Way of Long Death Monk. It doesn't cause friendly fire like that feature, and it lasts longer because creatures don't automatically come out of the frightened condition. But it also only targets one creature at a time, so depending on the combat, Hour of Reaping might still occasionally be a better feature. Lastly, resistance to one of the elemental damage types is really useful, and the bonus action setup of the feature makes it easy to justify using it, even if we aren't trying to spread the frightened effect among creatures. I think some people don't like the 10-foot limit to the aura, but honestly the monk is so mobile, I don't see that being a big issue. I see the 10-foot aura of a paladin's aura of protection always being useful, so I can see this being just as useful. Honestly, the only problem I see with it is that this subclass defining feature happens so late at level 11. For our 17th level feature, we gain Ascendant Aspect, which actually grants us 3 benefits. Firstly, we get Augment Breath. This allows us to spend 1 key point to change our breath weapon to either a 60-foot cone or a 90-foot long line. Additionally, we can add an extra martial arts die of damage to that, making the damage at this level 4d10 damage. This isn't very powerful for this level, but it's a big area of effect. Maybe too big actually, because a 20-foot cone is less likely to hit allies than a 60-foot one. We also gain 10 foot of blind sight. This is awesome, but like the features of Aspect of the Worm, it's a shame to have such a game-defining feature happen so late into a campaign. And the last feature we gain is Explosive Fury, which allows us to cause an explosion of damage centered on us that hits creatures of our choice whenever we activate Aspect of the Worm. If the creatures subjected to this effect fail a dexterity saving throw, they'll take 3d10 acid, cold, fire, lightning or poison damage, our choice. Or they'll take half that damage if they succeed on their saving throw. This is a nice benefit to an already great feature that we're likely to use. There's no friendly fire to it either. All in all, I really like the 17th level feature. It feels suitably dramatic. I think some people would argue it's not actually giving us that much extra damage compared to what a lot of spellcasters can do at this tier of play, but I see how we're actually doing a lot of low-level blasts of damage in combination with our martial arts. So it's always complementing what we're already doing, which I think it means that we're going to actually be stacking a bit of damage on top of the damage that we were already doing. And unlike spellcasters, we're not actually relying on spells, so the things that shut down spellcasters like Counterspell aren't going to affect us. So what are my overall thoughts? Honestly, I think this might be the best designed monk subclass I've reviewed so far. Maybe tying with the Long Death Monk for giving the best flavour and the best mechanics to it. The features this subclass gets are all really fun and interesting, which actually I felt was a really big problem with the Astral Monk, which I reviewed recently. Some of the features could have been made more powerful, but I think I see the intent of this subclass. It's meant to deliver a monk that specialises in dealing a little bit of damage to a lot of creatures simultaneously and frequently, and also one that mixes martial arts and controlling the elements in a seamless way, which I think is where the 4 Element Monk really failed. That subclass always felt very all or nothing when it came to spellcasting or martial arts. All of this will actually make optimising this subclass difficult, because it's very backloaded. A lot of the subclass's best features don't arrive until 11th level onwards. Because of this, if I were building around the subclass for just high level play, I think I'd actually make a mostly straight classed monk. So Actually, let's consider a really quick mini build for that. For ability scores, I'd maximise dexterity and wisdom, like I would any straight classed monk, and then try to have both a decent constitution and strength score. Then I would pick up skill expert at some point before level 5 to gain expertise in athletics, and I would aim to boost my wisdom to an 18 with the +1 modifier from that feat. This would make us a pretty good grappler ready for when we gain wings unfurled, so we can make the most of forcing creatures' movements. It would also give us the ability to shove creatures away from us with the spare attack we have from extra attack, which would be useful for the hit and run playstyle the build offers. And then for levels 8 and 12, I would take ability score increases to boost wisdom or dexterity. I think I'd focus on wisdom first to make Aspect of the Worm more reliable though. When we have frightened a creature with Aspect of the Worm, they have disadvantage on their skill checks, again letting us lean into grappling and forced movement options. From level 12 to 18, we'd probably just keep picking up monk levels. This would net us Diamond Soul, another ability score increase, and the great 17th level features that we get from the subclass. And at level 18 we'd also gain the Astral Projection spell, which we can use on ourselves. And then, having taken 18 levels of monk, I'd probably finish off with a dip into another class like fighter. Maybe just to get action surge so we can use our breath weapon attack twice per turn. Super simple build and would in my opinion work really well at high levels. But that concludes the video for this week. Next week I'm going to put out a video showing how we can get the most out of the features this subclass gives us in a typical level 1 to 12 campaign. And spoiler, it's going to be electrifying.